Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I have my birth story from my first baby girl, from my first baby. I am currently 4 weeks postpartum, so fingers crossed I can remember everything. I wanted to film this straight away, but I was in no position to do that. So this is Daisy. She is currently asleep, but she's 4 weeks old, so I just wanted to quickly show her so I can put her back. But yeah. Oh, hey Papa. Little bit of background story. With my pregnancy, I did have gestational diabetes, so I was on insulin overnight. But because of that, I had always been told that I will probably be induced. They don't like letting people with gestational diabetes go full term. So I always knew about like 38, 39 weeks, that would be it. So I had a scan, I can't remember how many weeks, and she was actually breached. So she was around the wrong way, her head was up the top instead of being down the bottom. And they said, that's fine, there's plenty of time for her to turn, it's all good. So it came to my 35-week checkup, and the doctor basically booked me in for an ECV, which is, I forget the full name of it, but they basically manually try and turn the baby. So from the outside, the doctor tries to maneuver it and turn it around. So they booked me in for that. Day came, it was a Monday, and they called me and they said, oh, don't bother coming in. The doctor rostered on doesn't actually do ECVs. So we'll get someone else to call you back and book you in when there is one rostered on. So then they booked me in for later that week. However, I had a checkup in the middle of the week and I saw a different doctor. I went through the public system, so I was seeing basically a different doctor every time. And this doctor, he had over 20 years experience, he was switched on, and I think that this was his first day at the clinic. He was a lovely, lovely man, and I did previously have some bleeding. I went into the hospital one time because I had a gush of blood, and that was on my file. And he said, because you've only had one unprovoked bleeding, you can go ahead with the ECV, but if you were to have more. And I said, well, actually I had another one and I told the doctor last week. And he's just like, oh, well, no, you can't do the ECV, basically. He said, you can do it, but I wouldn't recommend it. We'll book you in for a C-section. I looked at Dean and he just nodded. And I'm like, okay. Then he asked me, how much were you set on having a vaginal delivery? And I said, look, I've always said from the start, however she needs to get here, it's fine. Whatever is safest for her and me. And he said, I would recommend a C-section. So we booked in for that that was a Wednesday. We booked it in for the following Thursday and cancelled the ECV. So then I was booked in at 38 weeks and 4 days to have the C-section. I was frantically getting everything ready. And then we went to the hospital. We had to check in at 7 a.m. I had to fast from 12 a.m. So I checked in at 7 a.m. and there were actually 2 other ladies who had C-sections that same day. I was meant to be the third. And then when we arrived, I said, should I be waiting that long with my gestational diabetes and fasting and everything like that? And they were like, oh no, it should be okay. And then they checked. And eventually I was actually pushed to the second slot, which was good. Probably not for the middle person who was then pushed to the last, but anyway, it happened. What happened was we got shown our room. It was a tiny, tiny room, and it was very close to the nurses' desks, and there were the other 2 ladies in similar rooms, but we had our own room. So Dean and I sat in there for a while. The nurse or midwife came in, gave us the stockings on your leg, and we put them on. And then we met the doctor who's going to perform the C-section, and she came and took me for an ultrasound to make sure that Daisy, or the baby, was around the wrong way still. Obviously they don't want to have a C-section for nothing kind of thing. The plan was if she had turned around, then we would be induced. But anyway, she was still around the wrong way, and then we just had to wait. And then I think that the anaesthetist came in, and then they told us about the spinal tap and what's going to be happening. Yeah, we basically went down to the operating theatre. We were waiting there for a while. We moved into the room before you go into the operating room, and that's when they give you the spinal tap. Dean was actually allowed in that room with me, and he watched it happen. So what happens is you need to like sit on the edge of the bed and they help you, and you're meant to like crouch, so you can't see me, but you're meant to crouch over like that, so it straigns out your spine, and they give you an anesthetic to numb the area, and then they put in the other part of the thing to make everything numb. So you just need to stay really, really still and bend over, and it is so hard to actually, when they say, okay, so you need to crouch over, you think, okay, and then you've got this huge belly and boobs in the way, you're like, oh my God, this is so much harder than what you think to like crouch over. But anyway, you do that, and then at one stage I looked at Dean when like the needle's going in, and his eyes were just like, and I said, Dean, don't look at that, I saw that. And the nurse that was with me said, I saw you look at him. But anyway, it was fine. I dealt with it really, really well. I was very proud of myself. But then when it's finished, the nurse that's leaning over with you, they have to put your legs back on the table because you can't really feel them. I did also have another nurse with me up with my head kind of thing, and there were heaps of people in the operating theatre as well. The nurse that was with me, she basically stayed with me the whole time, and she's who I saw, as well as the anaesthetist. I don't know if I'm saying that word wrong, sorry. It's a hard word to say. And I couldn't feel anything, but you can feel like tugging and pulling, which they warn you about, that you can feel that. I will say that up above there was this big light with like shiny, like reflective things on there, and if you looked up you could probably see what they were doing, so I try not to do that. Now he did warn me that I could feel sick and to let him know, because he can administer some medication to make me not feel so nauseous. When I got on the table I actually started shaking, and he didn't warn me about that, and I said, oh, I'm just like so nervous, and he said, no, the medication can cause you to shake. I was shaking like on and on, like it was severe, like shaking like a leaf. I just didn't expect that, did not see that coming, and then I felt nauseous. And so he first administered the medication, and then it went away, and throughout the operation I vomited. Like I vomited in my hair, like honestly it was just like, it was awful, like because you want to like, obviously your instinct is to like sit up when you vomit, but you couldn't. All you could do was just like vomit to the side. It was so bad. So I think I vomited maybe like 4 times, but you're shaking. So you have your arms out like this, and you can move. I think I was able to move this arm. So then when they were performing the operation and before they got her out, they were like, oh wow, she's really stuck. So, you know, lots of pulling and tugging, and I'm just trying to think of other things. And the nurse was there, and she was really kind, and she was asking me questions about like my pets and things like that to try and keep me distracted, which was so nice. At some point the nurse did swap out for another one because it was her tea break, but another lovely nurse came in and she was talking to me as well. And I don't know how to say this, but it's not like everyone says, when you first see your baby, you feel like that moment. And both Dean and I have said afterwards, like we were expecting this big moment of seeing your baby for the first time. And honestly, it was not pretty. Like she looked like a little monster. And she had all this dark hair, and this whole time I'd been thinking, like imagining my child being this little blondie, and she had all this dark hair, and like this, like obviously they've been inside you, they've got a everything's smooshed, but like I have a photo of her and it's not pretty, like that first moment when we saw her. And I'm feeling really sick and I'm shaking like a leaf. And they took her over to like the resuscitation thing. She was fine, she was breathing fine and everything, but they cleaned her up, and Dean actually got to cut the cord there. Then they wrapped her up and Dean held her, and we had our first photo, all of us together, and I've got like vomit on my face. I will say that I actually did wear a bit of makeup on the day, and I'm glad that I did. No one told me that I had to take it off. I'm glad, because I felt better that I had photos with a little bit of makeup. Not that it should matter, but I just preferred that. Forgot to mention when she came out and the nurse that was with me, she said, oh, what's her name? And I said, I was so scared to say her name because I hadn't really seen her, and I was like feeling so sick. And I looked at Dean and he's like, yeah. And I said, I can't say it, you say it. And then he said Daisy, and she's like, oh yeah, that's lovely. And like, it just didn't feel right because I hadn't really seen her properly. I don't know, it was such a weird experience. I don't even know why I couldn't say it. So after they finished me up and everything, they wheeled me into recovery, and the midwife from the ward was there, who was with me the whole time as well. She said, okay, do you want to have skin on skin time with that? And I said, to be honest, I feel really sick. And I was like shaking still, and I felt nauseous. And she's just like basically chucked it on me and chucked it on my boob. And she wasn't latched correctly, and she made such a mess of my boob. Like, it was not good. And I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I'd never breastfed before or anything, so it was just a big mess. And then I'm like, I feel sick, and then I've got her on me, and I'm laying down, and I'm just like vomiting out the side, like not cute at all. Like, I felt like just a mess. And I was in recovery. It went really quickly, but I think I was in there for about 30 minutes or so. And I'm pretty sure they gave me painkillers as well. And honestly, it was just a blur being in recovery. And then they took me back up to the room, and we were just in the room for ages. Honestly, I can't even remember. It goes so quickly. Because of the gestational diabetes, we did with Daisy's blood sugar levels, we had to check them every couple of hours. So we needed 4 tests to be above a certain amount, and if they weren't, then we needed to restart them. So the first one was fine, the second one she failed, so then we had to start again and do 4 more. This was where I needed to be like feeding her the right amount, and the nurse was, or the midwife was actually like expressing my boob. It was just like so tiring, and I didn't know how to get her to latch properly, and she was crying, and she was so tiny and little. Like, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Like, it was not fun the first 24 hours. And the fact that I had a catheter in, I couldn't move, and like sometimes I would just feel like a gush, and I'm like, oh my god, is there heaps of blood? And the nurse would have to check it. Like, I couldn't check it. I just was in bed, not able to move. In the evening, I had some food, and I just spewed it all up. I felt so sick and nauseous and very tired and exhausted. It was rough. But my mum came in that evening to meet her. So visiting hours started at 2, so I think she came like 2 or 3 or something. And then Dean's mum came in to meet her as well after my mum left. And yeah, and it was shortly after that I spewed everything up. I was on endones for my pain, and the next day after I showered, I felt really dizzy and sick, so we switched to tramadol, and that was so much better. But it did actually affect my hearing, which isn't listed as a symptom, but when I stopped taking them and stopped taking as many as frequently, my hearing has gone back to normal. Then I was on other medication for my nausea, and then as well as Panadol and Nurofen. Even now, sometimes I still have some Nurofen or Panamax if I'm in a little bit of pain. But overall, my scar has healed really, really well. One thing I didn't realize is that afterwards, because they cut through everything, it's numb. So just be prepared for that if you have a C-section. Now I'm starting to get a little bit of feeling back, and it feels a bit tender. Yeah, if it's a bit sore or something, I just take some painkillers. You know, they do say like a 6-week recovery, and I'm at 4 weeks, so I think I'm doing pretty well for 4 weeks. So I stayed in hospital for 2 nights. So the next night they actually moved me to another room, which was a bigger room, which was so much more comfortable. And then I went in on Thursday, and then I went home on the Saturday. On the Saturday, I was up and moving around. I fed her in a chair, and I was feeling really, really good. And they said, no pressure, but did you want to go home? You know, we can get the doctor to sign off. You're doing really well. We think that you're more than capable. And I said, yeah, like, I wasn't expecting it at all. And at first I was just like, oh my God, am I ready? And I'm like, well, I may as well go home and be comfortable. So yeah, I only ended up staying 2 nights. And the hospital actually, on the day that I left Saturday, they weren't overly busy. They weren't like pushing me out or anything like that. It was just, okay, let's go home. Because of COVID, the visiting restrictions were a little bit hazy, because the first nurse, obviously Dean could be there, and he could stay there as long as he wanted, basically. I do live in regional Victoria, by the way, so our restrictions might be different to Metro Melbourne, and at the time it was the 10th of December when she was born. Dean was allowed there all the time. There wasn't a place for him to sleep, so he wasn't able to stay overnight, which was fine. He just went home and then came back in the morning, and then I was allowed 2 visitors, which had just recently changed. It wasn't specific on if they could be, if it was just one person or if they could change, and if one person came out and then another person came in, or they could be there at the same time. So my mum came in and then Dean's mum came in after my mum left. They might have actually had some overlapping time, to be honest, but my dad didn't come in. And the next day, my mum and dad came in. The midwife then was freaking out, saying, no, you can only have 1 visitor. And I said, well, yesterday we had 2. Then she went and checked and she said, well, okay, so I was wrong, you can have 2, but it can only be these 2 here that are now. So then Dean's mum couldn't come in that day, or no one else could come in that day. But it was fine because I got to go home the next day anyway. That's how it worked for COVID with visitors for us, which I was fine with anyway. Like, I mean, it's exhausting. You know, you wouldn't really want too many visitors anyway, to be honest. But yeah, there's my birth story. I feel like it was a pretty positive birth story. I'm pretty happy with how everything went, and you know, it is what it is. And now we have a beautiful baby girl and she's doing really well. She did lose 8% of her birth weight within the first 48 hours, but I think the gestational diabetes might have given her like a little bit of a false birth weight anyway. She is over her birth weight now. Hopefully this helped you, gave you some kind of insight. I went public throughout my experience, not privately, which is fine because we were just so overpaying doctors to try and get pregnant in the first place that it was nice to be able to have a baby and, you know, go to doctor's appointments and not fork over hundreds of dollars like we'd been previously doing. The public system was fine in my experience. I wouldn't say it was world-class standard kind of thing, but my baby's safely here and I'm okay, and yeah, it's all good. Wishing you all the best with your pregnancy. Hopefully you have a safe and happy arrival of your baby. And yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.